They say schools are built to shape the future. But what if some of them never let go of the past? Behind the cheerful chatter in hallways and the ring of classroom bells, there are stories whispered in dorm rooms, stories that were never meant to be heard. Imagine this. You're lying in your dorm bed after a long weekend. The sun isn't up yet, the campus is silent, and exhaustion keeps your eyes half closed. Then you feel it, the edge of your mattress slowly sinking, as though someone just sat beside you. You freeze. Your roommate's asleep. The air grows still, and then a cold hand brushes the back of your neck. Or picture yourself alone in a building long after midnight. Only the hum of fluorescent lights keeps you company. You're typing, trying to finish an assignment, when you hear slow footsteps above the ceiling tiles. Someone's up there, watching, waiting. These aren't urban legends. They're true accounts of ordinary students who found out that safety can vanish in an instant. Welcome to disturbing true school horror stories. It began like any other freshman story, the kind filled with hope, freedom, and nerves. For Emily, college was supposed to be her new beginning. She stood outside a red-brick dorm building clutching a worn duffel bag, heart pounding, unaware that the walls behind her would soon hold a secret she'd never forget. She grew up in a small town in West Virginia, barely 15 minutes from campus. The plan was simple: live on campus for independence, drive home on weekends for comfort. But 2021 wasn't a normal year. The world was still recovering from lockdowns, and half the dorms were empty. Students preferred off-campus apartments. Those who stayed, like Emily, were surrounded by silence thick enough to hear their own breathing echo through the hall. Her roommate, Sophie, had texted her before move-in day. She seemed kind but distant, the kind of person who replies with short, perfectly punctuated messages. When they met, she was polite, almost too polite. Her words felt measured, like she was choosing them carefully from a list, and her eyes, they lingered. That first night went quietly. Sophie unpacked in neat precision, books lined by height, bottles arranged by color, drawers locked with a small silver key. She mentioned she'd had a roommate last semester, but she didn't stay long. Emily didn't ask why. Weeks passed in uneasy normalcy. Sophie spent most nights at her boyfriend's dorm, leaving Emily alone. Every Friday, Emily packed a small bag and drove home, returning early Monday morning, around 6. It became routine, safe, predictable, until the morning it wasn't. That Monday she returned exhausted, dropped her bag, and collapsed on her bed, a tall one with a thick memory foam topper that hugged every curve. The air was still. Then she felt it, the edge of the mattress sinking slightly as though someone leaned on it. She froze. Her mind tried to explain it away. Maybe the foam shifted. Maybe she'd moved. But the pressure was slow, deliberate, heavy. Then it lifted. Her pulse thundered. She turned her head. Sophie lay on her side, facing the wall, breathing evenly, asleep. Emily buried her face in the pillow, convincing herself it had been nothing. But the next Monday, it happened again. She lay down, half awake, when the bed dipped. Not at the edge this time, but beside her hip, the whole side sagging under weight. Her chest tightened. Then came the creak of feet landing on the floor, a jump. Someone had jumped off her bed. She stared upward, too afraid to move. Sophie, again, appeared to be asleep. She told herself she was overtired, maybe dreaming, maybe imagining it. Yet deep inside, something whispered that she wasn't alone. The third Monday removed all doubt. She returned, crawled into bed, and pretended to sleep. The dorm was silent except for the faint tick of the wall clock. Then, the weight returned. The mattress depressed slowly, closer, closer, until she could feel warmth against her back. And then, a hand, cold, motionless, resting on the back of her neck. Her blood ran ice cold. She couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. The hand didn't squeeze, it simply stayed there, testing, waiting. Seconds dragged like hours, then the weight lifted. Footsteps touched the floor once more. She stayed still, pretending to sleep, until she heard nothing but her heartbeat. When she finally turned, Sophie was lying exactly as before, back to her, seemingly asleep. That was enough. Emily grabbed her phone and keys, fled the dorm, and called her mother. Within hours, she'd been moved to a new room. She refused to file a police report. No proof, no bruises, just fear that felt too real to explain. In her new dorm, she noticed what she'd ignored before. Sophie's locked drawer filled with prescription bottles. 10 at least, none for acne as she'd claimed. And the story about the previous roommate who didn't last. Maybe sleepwalking, maybe something worse. A few days later, Sophie texted, "You left a book and binder here. Come get them." Against her better judgment, Emily went back. The room was empty when she entered. Relief washed over her until the door creaked. Sophie stood there, silent, her gaze flat. "Where's your new room?" she asked softly. "First floor?" Emily lied. "Which hall?" "By the stairs." Sophie's lips curved almost into a smile. "You shouldn't leave your door unlocked." Emily brushed past her and left without looking back. She never saw Sophie again. But years later, she still wonders, was it sleepwalking? A side effect of medication? Or was Sophie simply testing how close she could get before Emily woke up? Her mother once said, "Maybe that hand wasn't meant to stay still. It was meant to see how long before you'd react." Now, whenever Emily feels her mattress shift in the dark, she lies awake, eyes wide, waiting, just in case this time the hand doesn't lift, because some nightmares don't end when you open your eyes. They sit beside you, perfectly still, watching. There's a certain silence that only exists after midnight on a college campus. The world outside might be asleep, but the buildings still hum faintly. Lights buzzing overhead, air vents sighing in empty halls, the faint echo of something unseen moving just beyond sight. For most, it's peaceful, but for Ryan, that silence would become something he'd never forget. He wasn't the type to stay out late. He didn't party, didn't drink, didn't linger on campus longer than necessary. But that night, he had no choice. A final project for his advanced statistics course was due in the morning, and his laptop had given up days ago. The only working computers were in the business building, a place that felt harmless by day, but hollow at night. It stood at the far edge of campus, 3 stories tall and oddly quiet, even during daylight. Students joked about it being haunted, not because of ghost stories, but because of how empty it always felt. After hours, its silence was the kind that pressed against your ears, like the building itself was holding its breath. At 10 p.m., Ryan swiped his student ID at the main door. The electronic beep echoed sharply through the vacant lobby. The air inside was colder than outside, not freezing but unnaturally cool, the kind that made your skin tighten. His footsteps echoed up the stairwell as he climbed to the second floor, heading for the computer lab he'd used dozens of times before. The lab smelled faintly of cleaning fluid and plastic, 20 computers lined neatly in rows, each separated by short partitions. Fluorescent lights glared down, humming faintly. Ryan set down his bag, booted a machine, and began to work. For nearly an hour, everything felt normal. The rhythmic clacking of his keyboard filled the air. Every so often, he'd glance at the clock, reminding himself to leave by 1. He was alone, but it didn't feel unusual. Not yet. Then, just past 11:30, a sound shattered the calm. Bang. A door slammed somewhere down the hall. Ryan froze mid-keystroke, his eyes darting to the glass window in the door. The sound hadn't come from the entrance. It was deeper in the building. He waited, straining his ears. Nothing. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe the air system, maybe the janitor. Still, the noise had that unmistakable weight of human movement. He tried to shake it off and kept typing. But then came footsteps. Slow, heavy, measured. They echoed through the hallway outside, each one distinct. Heel, toe, deliberate, almost performative. Ryan's stomach tightened. He stared at his reflection in the black edge of his computer screen, trying not to turn around. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then came a new sound. The door handle rattled, not gently, hard, twisting, jerking, over and over. Ryan's breath hitched. The door was locked. The system automatically sealed it after 9 p.m. Whoever was out there couldn't come in. But they were trying. Hard. For nearly half a minute, the handle shook violently. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. A few seconds later, the footsteps started again, slow, receding into the distance until they faded away. Ryan exhaled shakily. He let out a nervous laugh, more to break the silence than because he found it funny. Probably maintenance, he muttered, his voice echoing back at him in the empty room. But his nerves wouldn't settle. Every sound, the whir of the computer fan, the buzz of the light, felt amplified, sinister. He tried to focus on his work. His eyes flicked to the time. 11:47. Just a bit longer. He could push through. Then, from above him, came a sound that turned his blood to ice. A faint dragging noise, soft, slow, right above his head. He tilted his chin upward, eyes locking on the white panels of the drop ceiling. Another sound, a shuffle, a shift. One of the tiles moved slightly, bending down a fraction under weight. Ryan stood. Every nerve screamed at him to leave, but curiosity rooted him in place. "Pipes," he whispered. "It's just the pipes." But pipes don't crawl. The sound moved, from one end of the ceiling to the other. Something was up there, deliberately, carefully shifting its weight to stay quiet. Then silence again. Ryan stared at the ceiling, chest rising and falling rapidly. The building was old, sure. But this? This wasn't old pipes or air vents. He could hear the faint rhythm of breathing above him. He grabbed his bag and flash drive, yanking the drive from the port. His pulse thundered. He didn't bother shutting down the computer. He moved toward the door, half expecting it to rattle again, but it stayed still. He slipped into the hallway. The lights hummed dimly, flickering every few seconds. The silence was thick, almost oppressive. He walked quickly, eyes darting between classroom doors. His footsteps echoed back at him. Or maybe it wasn't just his. He couldn't tell anymore. When he reached the stairwell, he pushed open the heavy metal door. The clang echoed up the stairwell. He started down, but made the mistake of looking up. His clothes were filthy, baggy, stained, torn. His hair was a tangled mess, hanging around a face that was half hidden in shadow. But what made Ryan's knees go weak was his expression. He was smiling. Not a friendly smile. A wide, toothy, unnatural grin, frozen in place like something was broken inside him. His head tilted slightly as he stared down at Ryan, eyes wide, gleaming with something between hunger and madness. They locked eyes for one terrible second. Then Ryan bolted. He flew down the stairs 2 at a time, his bag slamming against his hip. He didn't dare look back. The building seemed to close in around him, the echo of his footsteps overlapping with phantom ones that might not have been his own. He crashed through the first-floor door, sprinted down the hall, and nearly ripped the main door off its hinges as he shoved it open. Cold air hit him like a shock. He ran across campus until the dorm lights appeared ahead. Only then did he stop, gasping for breath, staring back at the dark outline of the business building. Its windows looked dead, hollow, like black eyes staring back. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, sunlight made the fear almost ridiculous. Almost. He needed to turn in his project, so he forced himself to go back. The building looked normal again. Students filled the halls. Everything seemed fine. Until he entered the computer lab. His stomach dropped. 2 of the ceiling tiles were gone, the one directly above where he'd been sitting, and another hanging loosely in the corner. He stood frozen until a janitor walked by with a cart. "Excuse me," Ryan called, voice trembling. "What happened to the ceiling?" The janitor looked up casually. "Oh, that. Found it like that this morning. Police said someone was living up there. Been sneaking in through the maintenance vents." Ryan's heart pounded. "Living? Up there?" "Yeah," the janitor said with a shrug. "Probably some drifter or squatter. Been hiding out for weeks, apparently." Weeks. That word hit like a brick. Weeks meant that the man hadn't just appeared that night. He'd been there, watching students, listening to them work, maybe even climbing down when no one was around. Later that day, campus security confirmed it. They'd found bedding, wrappers, even a small flashlight wedged in the insulation. The man had crawled through the ceiling's narrow maintenance space like a rat, surviving on whatever he could steal from vending machines. Ryan turned in his project and walked away without another word. But months later, every time he sat alone in a quiet room, he'd find himself glancing upward, just to be sure. Because once you've heard footsteps above you when you know you're alone, you never truly feel alone again. Some nightmares don't start in the dark. Some start under bright, fluorescent lights in the safest place you know, your school. For Annabelle, that safety shattered on what should have been a normal day. She was 16, quiet, and diligent, the kind of student teachers loved. Her school, a modern secondary in the UK, was only a few years old. It gleamed with fresh paint, glass panels, and perfectly polished floors. The kind of building that made parents feel secure. It wasn't just the design. It was the system. Every student, teacher, and staff member wore a lanyard ID card. Without it, you couldn't access most of the building. You had to scan it to move past the foyer into the hallways, to enter classrooms, even to get to the cafeteria. It was meant to keep everyone safe, but as the police would later explain, no system is foolproof, especially when it relies on trust. It was her second week at the new school and, technically, only her second full day. She'd been homesick most of the week before, so she was still learning her way around. The day was calm, routine, geography all morning, then lunch. She sat near the back of the cafeteria, sipping juice from the small carton the school provided. She drank too much, too quickly, because students weren't allowed to bring drinks into class. 20 minutes after lunch, she was fidgeting in her seat. Her teacher gave a long sigh when she asked to go to the bathroom. "Annabelle, we've just come back from break," he said, clearly annoyed. "I know, sir," she replied, already embarrassed. "But it's an emergency." He nodded reluctantly. "Fine. Be quick." She hurried out into the hallway. The silence of the school during class time always felt strange, just the hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of her shoes clicking down the tile. The cafeteria was empty, chairs stacked neatly. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant. She passed through 2 sets of glass doors into the restroom, relieved. A few minutes later, she came back out, adjusting her uniform. The hallway was still empty. Everything looked exactly as she'd left it, except for one thing. A man was sitting alone in the cafeteria. He looked up when she walked by and smiled politely. It wasn't unusual for teachers or visitors to be around during class hours, so she didn't think twice. He was dressed in plain clothes, a button-down shirt, dark trousers. Around his neck he wore the same kind of lanyard ID as every teacher did. That small detail was all it took for her to trust him. "Hey," he said softly, voice friendly. She jumped slightly, letting out a nervous laugh. "Oh, sorry, you startled me." He chuckled. "Didn't mean to. You're fine." She noticed the ID card again, though the photo side was turned inward, facing his chest, just like some teachers did. No red flag, nothing alarming. "I need a bit of help," he said. "Left some supplies in my car, heavy boxes. Do you mind helping me carry 1 or 2? She hesitated for a split second. Then she nodded. "Of course, because that's what polite students do. They help teachers." They started walking together through the corridor toward the foyer. The man didn't make small talk. His hands fidgeted constantly, first in his pockets, then ringing together. He walked quickly, but said almost nothing. Annabelle noticed, but she didn't know what to say. Social awkwardness was normal. Maybe he was just nervous or new. Still, something about the silence made her chest tighten. They exited through the main doors. Outside, the air was crisp and cool. The parking lot lay just beyond a row of tall hedges. You couldn't see it from the building. You had to walk almost to the edge of the property. As they approached, the man pointed. "Mine's the blue car down there." She followed his gesture, and that's when she noticed movement inside the vehicle. At first, it looked like bags or coats piled on the back seat. But as they got closer, she realized the bags were shifting. Her steps slowed. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness inside the car. And she saw them. Two men crouched low, hiding in the back. Her stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed run. She stopped walking, frozen mid-step. The man beside her followed her gaze and realized she'd seen them. He moved fast. His hand clamped around her wrist like iron. "Come on," he said sharply. But adrenaline is a powerful thing. She twisted, yanked, and somehow tore free. The shock of it sent her stumbling backward, and she bolted. Her shoes slapped against the pavement, echoing across the empty lot. Behind her, she heard shouting. Footsteps. The glass doors of the school loomed ahead, tall, automatic, painfully slow. They began to slide open. It felt like forever. She sprinted inside, heart pounding, lungs burning. She didn't stop until she reached the cafeteria counter, where a woman stood behind the till. Annabelle's voice broke as she gasped, "There's a man outside. The woman's face drained of color. She grabbed the phone, dialed security, and locked the front doors. Within minutes, teachers appeared, guiding Annabelle to an office while calling her parents and the police. When officers arrived, the men were gone. But the security footage told the story. The man wasn't a teacher. He wasn't even a parent. He'd found a student's lost ID card outside the gate that morning and used it to enter. The ID was flipped backwards so the photo didn't show. With one quick swipe, he had access to the entire building. The two other men were waiting in the car. The plan was clear. Lure a student out, grab her, and disappear before anyone noticed. It could have worked. It almost did. Police later arrested the suspects days later using the parking lot footage. They were charged with attempted kidnapping. Annabelle didn't go back to school for 2 weeks. When she did, she walked differently. Shoulders tense, eyes darting, never letting anyone behind her. She refused to go anywhere alone. Her friends said she was paranoid. Her parents called it trauma. Both were right. The school added new security measures after that. Extra staff at doors, stricter checks, new ID designs. But Annabelle didn't care about that. What haunted her wasn't the system. It was the memory, the sound of that calm, friendly voice. "Hey," it played in her head for months. It didn't sound dangerous. It sounded normal. That was the most terrifying part. Because monsters in real life don't always growl. They don't always chase. Sometimes they smile, speak softly, and ask for help. Sometimes they wear the symbols of authority we're taught to trust. Even now, years later, Annabelle still wears her own ID on a locking clip. She checks it twice before leaving the house. Her parents still walk her to the school gate whenever they can. She says it's just for peace of mind. But deep down, she knows it's because once your sense of safety breaks, it never truly repairs. And every time she passes a teacher she doesn't recognize, she glances. Not at their face, but at their ID card. Just to make sure it's turned the right way. Because now she knows it only takes one glance to see the difference between safety and a nightmare. Fear. It's the one emotion we all share. Ancient, instinctive, buried deep in our DNA. It's the reason our ancestors survived the darkness and the spark that still makes our hearts race when we hear a noise we can't explain. But sometimes, fear isn't born from the supernatural. It's born from the ordinary. from real people, real places, and moments that look harmless until they aren't. For the students in these stories, fear didn't come from myths or folklore. It came from dorm rooms, classrooms, and hallways, the very spaces meant to keep them safe. That's what makes these tales so haunting. They're not just stories, they're reflections of how easily safety can crumble. Think about it. Emily's fear began with something as small as a mattress shifting. Ryan's began with footsteps overhead, and Annabelle's began with a smile. Each moment, at first, was subtle, ordinary, unremarkable. And that's the most terrifying truth. The line between normal and nightmare is often invisible until you've already crossed it. Safety is something we rarely question until it's gone. We assume dorms are safe because there are locks. We assume schools are safe because there are IDs, teachers, and rules. But systems, no matter how advanced, are only as strong as the people inside them. When one person decides to cross a line, when one key, one lanyard, one decision falls into the wrong hands, everything changes. Emily trusted her roommate. Ryan trusted the emptiness of a quiet night. Annabelle trusted the lanyard around a stranger's neck. And that's how fear enters, softly, unnoticed, disguised as safety itself. It's the same fear that keeps you glancing over your shoulder when walking alone at night, the same feeling that tells you to double-check the lock even when you know you already turned it. That's not paranoia. That's the echo of survival. We live in an age of cameras, lights, and logic. We tell ourselves that real horror only happens in movies, that if something terrifying unfolded before us, we'd recognize it instantly. But the truth? Real fear doesn't scream, it whispers. It hides in small moments, the creak of a floorboard, the flicker of a light, the hum of a vent above your head. Your brain notices before you do. Your body reacts before your mind understands. That's why these stories linger. Because deep down, we've all felt that same electric jolt of uncertainty, that something's not right moment. Psychologists call it hypervigilance, the state of being alert and scanning for threats even when you should feel safe. Victims of trauma often live in this state, but in small doses, everyone does. It's part of what keeps us alive. When you hear Emily's story, you remember the time you heard a strange sound while alone. When you hear Ryan's, you recall that feeling of being watched in an empty room. When you hear Annabelle's, you think of the times you trusted someone because they looked official, or kind, or normal. These stories haunt us not because they're extreme, but because they could happen to anyone. What happens after fear is something people rarely talk about. Once the screaming stops, once the danger is gone, the real battle begins, inside the mind. Emily never sleeps without locking her door twice. She still wakes when her bed shifts, even from her own movement. Ryan can't study late without glancing at the ceiling. Annabelle still checks every ID she sees, even years later. Their stories don't end with the moment of escape. They continue in every ordinary day that follows. Because fear doesn't vanish, it mutates. It hides in the smallest parts of routine. It changes how you see the world. And that's the cruel thing about trauma. It doesn't just haunt your nights, it quietly rewires your days. At the heart of every horror story is a human being, breathing, thinking, breaking. It's easy to get lost in the shock, to focus on what happened, but look closer and you'll see something else. Survival. Emily didn't scream, she escaped. Ryan didn't freeze, he ran. Annabelle didn't panic, she fought back. They all listened to that tiny voice inside, the instinct that said, "This isn't right." That's what makes their stories powerful, because while the fear feels endless, their actions turn terror into survival. And maybe that's why people listen to stories like these. Not just to be scared, but to remind themselves that courage often starts with fear. Fear teaches. It sharpens instincts, makes you notice what you used to ignore. It reminds you that comfort can make you careless. Emily learned to trust her senses. Ryan learned to trust his gut. Annabelle learned that safety isn't guaranteed by systems or symbols. It's built by awareness. That's what true horror does. It wakes you up. It reminds you that the world isn't as harmless as we pretend. And yet it also reminds you of something else, that humans can endure almost anything. Even now, long after these stories ended, their echoes remain. Not just for them, but for everyone who's ever walked into an empty hallway or sat alone in a classroom long after dark. Maybe that's why we keep retelling them. Not to glorify fear, but to understand it, to control it, to take power back from the things that once terrified us. Because when you turn fear into a story, when you give it words, structure, and sound, it loses some of its grip. It becomes something you can look at, analyze, even learn from. And maybe that's the only way to truly move past it. The scariest part of these stories isn't the darkness or the unknown or the moment of terror. It's how ordinary they begin. How easily they could have been you or me, or anyone who ever trusted the safety of familiar walls. Emily felt it when the mattress sank beside her. Ryan heard it when the footsteps stopped above him. Annabelle saw it when the smile didn't feel right. 3 different people, 3 different stories. One shared realization. Safety is fragile. And maybe that's why these tales stay with us long after the video ends, because somewhere, deep down, we all recognize that same fragility. So tonight, when you turn off the lights, remember this. Fear doesn't always come knocking. Sometimes it slips quietly into the room and waits until you finally notice it's there. If you made it this far, take a breath. You survived the darkness for tonight. But before you go, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share this with someone who thinks real horror only exists in movies. Because sometimes, the most terrifying stories are the true ones. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and don't ignore that sound you just heard.